As Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Jesus stopped and called them. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him.
Good morning. My name is Carolyn Klassen, and I'm so glad to be with you here this morning. This is the second week in a row that I'm speaking, which is highly unusual, and given that I have a day job, it has felt like a lot. Last week, when I spoke about forgiveness, I went over my allotted time by a couple of minutes, and I knew I would, but I didn't tell anyone ahead of time because I figured it would be easier to ask for forgiveness than permission, because when you're speaking on forgiveness, they gotta give it to you. So this morning, I'm grateful for the topic of mercy, because I can ask for your mercy as I've been putting together this morning's teach more quickly than I'd like. And I figure it's a safe bet that I'm going to get it from you, because actually, TMP, you are merciful to me and really to all of us teachers. I want to thank you for how on Sunday mornings, as we have read the scripture and read the commentaries and really listened carefully as to what it feels like God is sharing to us, and we do that, we share a little bit of our heart with you. And you are kind and thoughtful, even as you challenge us. Because when you challenge us, that's a different sort of kindness, because it's this respect that says, I believe in you enough to ask the hard questions. So thank you. Pastor Paul was to be the designated speaker this morning, but he is in Ottawa to officiate at the funeral of a family member. The funeral was yesterday. And at a time when there's so little that any of us can do for Kaylee and Paul and their kids, I am one of the fortunate ones to be able to have something tangible that I could offer to him by taking on this morning's teach. You'll notice this morning that I'm using Father Gregory Boyle and his thoughts on mercy a lot in my teach this morning. As a priest in charge of the largest gang recovery ministry in the world, called Homeboy Ministries, he knows a lot about mercy. And actually, when I find life hard and stressful and I lose touch of the love that God has for me and for the world, there are times when I can get discouraged and weary. Sometimes I feel cynicism coming on. And then I know that's my cue to put Father Gregory Boyle in the books that he has written. I put him in my ears, and he reads stories of grace and mercy and kindness to me. And I find my way back to myself as I remember who Jesus is and who I am, created in God's image. You'll get what I'm talking about by the end. I'm going to start with a story about our household, and I have permission from Jay to share this story. During the spring of 2020, during those first months of the pandemic, when all learning was remote learning for students, some students flourished and many did not. Our son Jay, he never went to school for the classes. He went for the sports and for time with friends, so there was no point in school at all when he was at home. The pandemic did hard and dark things for him. He started switching around his days and nights. He would play video games all day and then play video games all night, and then he would ignore us as he slept during the day. He was miserable, and I didn't know what to do. I'd been his bonus mom for only about 4 years at that point, so I didn't know how much leverage I had to kind of encourage or cajole or push. I just didn't know. What I did do, though, was email all his teachers at school saying we were stuck because nothing was happening. And we met some of them online, and they offered great suggestions and beautiful encouragement, but there was no change. One of his courses that he was taking was an accounting course that had started in September and was a full-year correspondence course done online, but he had done it at the computer in Mr. J's classroom. I arranged with Mr. J, another one of his teachers then, to talk about this, and at the last minute, Mr. J changed it from a video conversation, to our backyard. He cycled over on this kind of a brisk spring day, and we sat socially distanced in the backyard. After we had exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes, we got to the important stuff. And I could see Jay's chin wobbling a bit, because he's a really good kid, and he knew he was messing up. And he was getting ready to be confronted. And Mr. J said something like, "So Jay, are you ever going to be an accountant?" And Jay was startled at what felt like a random question. And he's like, no. And he says, "Well, you have some of the very basics from before Christmas and the first bit after Christmas. So let's just say you've learned the essentials. But you're 12 assignments behind, and there's another 12 assignments ahead. That's 24 assignments." And Jay's chin is really wobbling now. And then he says this, "Here's what I propose. Each assignment takes about an hour. That's 24 hours. For every hour that you do good for yourself or somebody else, that counts as an accounting assignment. 15 minutes of walking around the block, quarter of an accounting assignment. 15 minutes of emptying out the dishwasher, another quarter of an accounting assignment. 24 hours of good for yourself or others, and you're done." That's when my chin started to wobble. It was beautiful. That experience of mercy was profound for Jay, and it was the TSN turning point moment. You can tell that I have all sons, right? Yeah. We have a lot of TSN turning point moment conversations at our house. It did not change everything overnight, but it did start the slow rise up. He started looking us in the eye. He would join us for supper. He would stay to load the dishwasher. We would crack a few jokes and have just these moments of connection. It changed Jay, but really it changed our whole household. And here's the thing, even as Jay was not doing the schoolwork, and that was a problem, when we all took a deep breath, we could see that the problem was actually much more a symptom of a big, deeper problem. Mr. J recognized that, and that's mercy. The pandemic did terrible things to a lot of people, and it landed harder on RJ for a whole bunch of reasons. And Mr. J seemed to understand that what he needed was mercy. That mercy touched him deeply and gave Jay a way out. Because really, the schoolwork was far less important than Jay's overall dismal state at that point. Mr. J gave our Jay what he needed, not what he deserved. So these last years, as I've been working and speaking with various groups, government departments, nonprofit organizations, groups of teachers, etc., mostly online, because pandemic, speaking to a green dot in my office, I have talked a lot about gritty grace and unrevolutionary mercy. So gritty grace is undeserved favor, simply being kind, not because you have to or because somebody's making you, but you just are. And then revolutionary mercy, which is when you're giving to others what they need, not what they deserve. And I'll explain to these groups that mercy is about extending kindness to somebody when you could punish them. They've done wrong and they're in a state where maybe they deserve a punishment, but instead you reach out and you give them what is truly good, what they need. And mercy is transformative. I've told the story of Jay and Mr. J to dozens of groups in the marketplace. And let me tell you, they eat this stuff up. They love having the language of grace and mercy and get excited about ways that they can extend it to themselves, to their family, and to the team at their workplace. They love knowing how to have the language and how to have a space where they can figure out how to extend this as a way of switching that downward spiral into something that's positive. It wasn't just necessary during pandemic lockdowns because, let's face it, many of us are prone to those downward spirals even now. You heard during the bumper video the text from Matthew 20, and we're going to look at it, but we're going to back up first just a little bit to understand the power of the story. Last week, we ended at the end of chapter 18 of Matthew, that story, that parable about forgiveness. And we're going to pick up at the beginning of chapter 19 as we talk this morning. Now, chapter 19 has stories of people making assumptions about Jesus and being really kind of disappointed by his responses and reactions. There's ways in which he talks about divorce in ways that empower and value women, that say, you can't just dump her and leave her penniless and homeless just because she burns the roast. That is not okay. And then they bring children to him, children want to come to him and they shush them away. And he's like, no, let them come to me. And he values these children in a way that those people do not understand. He encourages people to give up their stuff and to make their relationship with him and his people primary, and they walk away in disappointment. It's really inconvenient when Jesus invites people away from their own comfort to being in close relationship with people who push others aside. It's beautiful, but it's inconvenient. Then in chapter 20, there's a parable that ends with this line, so the last will be first and the first will be last. That's the punchline of the parable. Do you get it, people? Last, first, last, right? That's big. And then it's in the same chapter now where there's a short chunk where Jesus again predicts his imminent death. It's getting closer now. And then right after last shall be first shall be last, the mother of James and John steps in and asks for her grown-up children, her adult sons who are disciples. They're right there. She says, I want them on either side of you in your kingdom. And the other disciples, they get their shorts in a knot because they do not like that she has asked this question. And even more, that it might be granted, which would ice them out of those positions. This bothers them. And Jesus, I can almost imagine him getting a little exasperated by this point, essentially says, you guys seriously do not get what I'm trying to talk about. Because if you knew, it's really not a good time to be on either side of me right now. Trust me, that's not going to go well. And besides, being all important isn't really all that important. The disciples do not get it. They are blind to what Jesus is about. So now to our text. We're going to start in verse 29. As Jesus and his followers were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. So Jericho is about an 18-mile walk. So it's Jericho here, and then Jerusalem on the map is south, but topographically, I think you say, it's actually about a half mile up. So it's an 18-mile trip uphill. And so this is a hard, long trek for Jesus, but not just because it's uphill, but because the very next story after our text is Palm Sunday, which starts Holy Week, which starts his torture and death. This is a hard road for him to go up. And I want you to keep that in mind as we're listening further into this story. He's heading into his torture and death. So verse 30, 2 blind men were sitting on the roadside. And let me just stop here and note that blindness is considered a punishment. It's a curse during this time. In John 9:1, the text says, as he went along, Jesus, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who has sinned? Is it this man or his parents that he would be born blind? There was an assumption that blind people were cursed. And there was a lot of blind people back at that point. There were no antibiotics. So if you had an infection in your eye, it did not go well. And blind people, they were stuck. They were not in a position to work in that culture. They were left to beg. That was their only option. And so they were at the very, very bottom of the social totem pole. In fact, hardly considered part of the totem pole at all. They were considered outcasts as they had to beg for a living. They were some of the lasts that Jesus had talked about that were in a position to become first. So when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us. So this here is amazing. These blind people address Jesus as the Son of David, which is a name that's only given to the Messiah. The disciples still didn't get what Jesus was about, and these blind folks could see that Jesus was the Messiah while they were still blind. Verse 31, the crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us. I want you to note here, the crowd rebuked them, minimized them, shushed them, kind of like they were children, what happened in the previous chapter, essentially saying, you're not important to Jesus. And I want you to note is that their pain was so great and the desire for healing so large that they did not listen. Nope. They got more annoying. They shouted louder. So let's note something about human nature here. People in pain long for healing and will make noise to let you know of their suffering. That's really normal. Inconvenient, but normal. That noise can be a hassle. It's a pain. It can seem like yelling. It can feel like aggression. But what if we heard that rather as a cry for mercy? So think about it. The kids in the classroom that act out. The teen who's experimenting with drugs. The guy on the street who's yelling. It's uncomfortable for us to watch. It's a pain in the neck for those of us who are in the crowd that just want to be there on our merry way. It's kind of cringy, hey? We want them to settle down and be quiet. Shh. But those folks are struggling and they need healing, and so they do the opposite. And so what if we, like Jesus, saw those that are loud and attention-seeking and troublesome, not as people who are noisy and inappropriate, but rather folks who need mercy? Verse 32, Jesus stopped and called them. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. I love this. The answer would seem obvious, and indeed it is, but Jesus doesn't make the assumption. He stops. He stops on the very, very hard journey up to Jerusalem with the crowds pushing these guys away, and he turns and pays attention to them. He notices them. That already is its own mercy, right? Jesus doesn't assume that he knows what they want. He gives them the dignity of choice and to voice their request. So again, he honors them with mercy as in giving the act of giving them agency. He respects them as people who get to choose rather than just giving them what he thinks they probably want. So, Lord, they answered, we want our sight. They want to see. Of course they do, but they weren't like the rich man who wanted to hold on to his rich stuff. They didn't ask for riches. They might have, but they didn't. They weren't like the sons of Zebedee, James and John, who wanted prestige and honor. Nope, they wanted healing and wholeness. They wanted to see. Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him. Jesus responded to their pleas for mercy. He healed them by touching them. So these men that were outcasts and marginalized are so close to him, to Jesus, that he can right there touch them before they can see. He gets up close, blesses them with his touch, and then they see. Once they see, they follow him. And their choice is, right after healing, to go along. Can you imagine you get your sight? Like, of all the possibilities, you could go like tour the sites that you've never seen before. You could go visit family and see them. You could go get a job and have gainful employment. Any of those were options, but they chose to follow him. So I want you to notice some of the parallels between this story and the one immediately before it in this chapter. So what starts with is you have two blind men. The previous story was about two disciples. And Jesus said, "What do you want?" One story, he asked the blind man directly. Another story, the mother's there, but they're there as well. And then what happens, the request is for mercy. The disciples were requesting places of honor. And they received sight. They wanted to see, and they got to see. They lost their blindness. And the disciples, they had continued blindness. Jesus wanted them to see. He was encouraging them to see, but they had continued blindness. And then when the disciples got jealous and upset, got their knickers in a knot, he got Jesus explaining all over again, where it says, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many, reminding them, you don't want to be up there, you want to serve. You want to be in a place where you're giving mercy. When we struggle and feel on the edges and feel powerless and ask for mercy, that's when we have truly sight. That's when we see. I don't think it's coincidence that this request for humble mercy by the blind men is right after the disciples are jockeying for power. Jesus is saying something really important, not only in the healing of the blind man, but to the entire crowd and to the disciples. There's a vulnerability in the blind men that Jesus recognizes is authentic. In the huff-puffery of the disciples, seeing themselves as put together, front-of-the-line guys, they couldn't see it, and that created blindness. The blind guys were in a position to be able to see in a way the disciples could not. Helen Keller, who is a woman born blind and deaf, and she said, better to be blind and see with your heart than to have two good eyes and see nothing. It's mercy that we seek. It's mercy that we're called to extend. Our task today is to truly, truly see that, to open our eyes and not be blind, to open our hearts and not be blind. Father Gregory Boyle talks about mercy in a podcast called Broken Halo. Listen as he talks about how men and women find their way to Homeboy. Please.
What is it that kind of pulls people into that life?
Well, we've been around for a long time, so word of mouth, of course, and people have, once you walk in the place, there's, as a homie said once, there's an aroma of kinship. And so if it's true that, and it is, that traumatized people are more likely to cause trauma, then it's equally true that cherished people will be able to find their way to the joy there is of cherishing themselves and others. So it's contagious, and once you get a dose, it's pretty compelling. Even if somebody reoffends or leaves or gets high and disappears, becomes homeless, once you've had a dose of that, we used to say maybe they'll be back, and now we never say that. We always say he'll be back, and they always come back because it's a safe place, and it's a place where gang members and felons can be seen and then be cherished. And that's a very healing, a compelling thing.
We're talking about Homeboy Industries with its founder, Father Greg Boyle, the author of the forthcoming book out next week called Forgive Everyone Everything. And in the book, you say that you once saw that phrase on a bumper sticker somewhere, but really just kind of as a pastoral call to believers. Imagine if we lived that way, how our lives would be different.
Well, I think that expression, forgive everyone everything, is really about mercy, so forgiveness is, sometimes we settle for forgiveness. We should hold out for mercy, or as Francis said, as he was just named Pope, he said that's the name of God is mercy. And so forgiveness is waits. Forgiveness waits for people to come to terms. And are we all in agreement when we sign this document of forgiveness? Forgiveness waits, but mercy doesn't wait. It's just right there. It's the Father running to the Son and embracing him, even though he's behaved badly. So it was a bumper sticker, and it ended up we have morning meeting every day for 10 minutes, and there's always a thought for the day, and it was my turn, and I had just parked behind a car that said, forgive everyone, everything, and next thing you know, it was a kind of a thought for the day on how merciful we can be if we were to, forgive everyone, everything. We're all invited to be in the world who God is, compassionate, loving, kind, merciful, and so it's hard to do, but clinging is, of course, always the source of our suffering. So if you cling to resentments, brace yourself for, a world of hurt and pain. But the minute you let go of stuff and you just love being loving, you discover your true self in loving, and loving attention is who we are.
Loving attention is who we are. Father Greg suggests that mercy is bigger and more complete than forgiveness. He says, sometimes we settle for forgiveness. We should hold out for mercy. As I've been thinking about this, I remember my cousin, a teacher, telling me a story about when he started teaching at a new school. He told me how, on his first day, he sat at the back of the classroom with the guidance counselor. After the class left, the guidance counselor started to point to some of the empty seats. Do you see that guy that sits over there? His home is a drug house, and so sometimes it's so chaotic that he hardly has had rest the night before. So when he comes to class, sometimes he falls asleep. And this one over here, that girl, her mom sometimes doesn't come home all night and isn't even there in the morning. And so she's not at school in the morning because she stays home to look after her little sister. And then he points to another chair and another chair and another chair to explain the situation and have my cousin understand why that student is going to struggle. When those students slept in class or skipped school, forgiveness would not be required because it was already swapped out for mercy. My cousin was invited and did admire these students for the way they carried their burdens rather than stand in judgment of them. Father Greg says, the father in the gospel runs to his son while he is still a long way off. Find me anywhere in the story where the father forgives his son. He doesn't. He doesn't settle for forgiveness. He rushes to mercy. He just says, you're here. Forgiveness looks at the man who has cut you off in traffic and asks, can I remember the generosity of God who forgave me to find a way to let go of how this driver was so rude for me? That's not a bad thought process. I spent all of last week talking about it in the Teach. Go look at it on YouTube. There's merit to that. But mercy looks at the same man in the same moment who has just cut you off with compassion and generosity and contemplates, I wonder what sort of world this man has lived in that it is necessary for him to change lanes like that. Maybe he just got fired, or maybe he's rushing to the hospital. Maybe he was raised in an environment where he didn't experience respect himself, and so in his bones, he doesn't actually know what it looks like. Mercy doesn't need to forgive him. It just holds space for compassion. One of the Beatitudes is about mercy. Matthew 5, verse 7 says, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Mercy is such a big deal, it made it into the Beatitudes. And let me read another quote from Father Gregory Boyle around this. Scripture scholars contend that the original language of the Beatitudes should not be rendered as blessed are the meek or blessed are the merciful. Rather, greater precision in translation would say, you're in the right place, if. The Beatitudes is not a spirituality after all. It's a geography. It tells us where to stand. And where to stand? With the folks at the margins, the ones that no one sees, the ones that are blind and ask for mercy. Sometimes it's you, because you're the one that feels like you need the mercy. And you're doing it sometimes in a persistently annoying, far too loud sort of way. And Jesus invites us to really see him for who he is, to see our own need for mercy and ask for it in a clear-eyed sort of way, and then to see our call to extend mercy to others in a way that's beautiful. When we marinate in the mercy of God, when we truly soak in the compassionate goodness of it, we have an opportunity to see things differently. A generosity is possible, and mercy becomes an option. I'm going to read a story from Father Gregory Boyle's book. I think this is from Tattoos on the Heart. He talks about how they opened up their church to folks that needed a place to sleep because they were homeless. He said, once the homeless began to sleep in the church at night, there was always the faintest evidence that they had slept there. Come Sunday morning, we'd foo-foo the place as best we could. We would sprinkle I Love My Carpet on the rugs and vacuum like crazy. We'd strategically place potpourri and airwick around the church to combat this lingering and pervasive reminder that nearly 50 and later on 100 men had spent the night there. About the only time we used incense at Dolores Mission, that church, was on Sunday morning before the 7:30 a.m. Mass, that before the crowd would arrive. Still, try as we might, the smell remained. The grumbling set in, and people spoke of churching elsewhere. It was at about this time that a man drove by the church and stopped to talk to me. He was Latino, in a nice car, and had arrived at some comfortable life and living. He knew I was the pastor. He waxed nostalgic about having grown up in the projects and pointed to the church and said he had been baptized and made his first communion there. Then he takes in the scene all around him. Gang members gathered by the bell tower, homeless men and women being fed in great numbers in the parking lot, folks arriving for the AA and the NA meetings, and the English as an additional language classes. It's a who's who of everybody who was nobody. Gang member, drug addict, homeless, undocumented. The man sees all this and shakes his head, determined and disgusted, as if to say, tisk tisk. You know, he says, this used to be a church. I mount my high horse, Father Gregory says, and says, you know, most people around here think it's finally a church. Then I rode off into the sunset, roll credits. He's a little sarcastic. So the smell in the church was never overwhelming, just undeniably there. The Jesuits figured that if we can't fix it, we're going to feature it. So we determined to address the discontent in our homilies. That's their version of a sermon one Sunday. Homilies were often dialogic, conversational, back and forth in those days. So one day I began with, "What's the church smell like?" People are mortified. Eye contact ceases, and all of a sudden the women are looking in their handbag for who knows what. "Come on now," I throw back at them. "What's the church smell like?" Don Rafael booms out in Spanish, "Smells like feet." He was old and never cared what people thought. Excellent. But why does it smell like feet? "Because many homeless people slept here last night," says a woman. "Well, why do we let that happen here?" "It's what we've committed to do," says another in Spanish. "Well, why would anyone commit to do that?" Somebody yells out, "It's what Jesus would do." "Well then, what's the church smell like now?" A man stands and bellows, "It smells like commitment." The place cheers. Guadalupe waves her arms wildly, "Smells like roses." The packed church roars with laughter and a newfound kinship that embraced somebody else's odor as their own. The stink in the church hadn't changed, only how the folks saw it. That's mercy. Lord Jesus, have mercy on us. God's mercy is so great that you may sooner drain the sea of its water, or deprive the sun of its light, or make space too narrow than diminish the great mercy of God. Amen.
So I've got a couple of questions for you today. This person here says, "It seems that the blind men or the prodigal son obtained mercy because they recognized it and reached out to ask. To the giver of the mercy, is there a difference when you extend mercy to someone who recognizes their need for mercy versus extending mercy to those who don't even recognize that they need it or ask for it?"
Well, anybody who's a parent of a cranky 2-year-old knows that they need mercy and they will not recognize or ask for it. They'll just be incredibly hard to deal with, right? And sometimes I have to sort of almost put that image in my head, where often people don't recognize in the moment their need for mercy. All they recognize is their dysregulation, and that crowds out absolutely everything. And so almost always, people won't see it in the moment. They'll only be able to see it maybe later and maybe not.
So would that be part of mercy, recognizing people wouldn't necessarily know that they need it?
Absolutely, yeah. And probably another part of mercy is not saying, "You need mercy now, so I'm going to extend it." That probably will just annoy the person even more, right? Where, you know, when Jim is a great person to be married to know about mercy, right? When I am irritable or short with him, he generally doesn't say, "Don't talk to me like that." He'll say, "Are you tired?" Right? "What's going on? Are you stressed?" And he'll like, "What can I bring you?" Or can I, like, he extends mercy to me. But if he would tell me in that moment, "Oh, you need mercy," I'd probably just get angry. And so, I think often it's something that we do, and you might talk about it later or maybe not.
For anyone who's wondering, you can go to Jim for tips.
Yeah.
Moving on. You had a phrase there where you said, "We settle for forgiveness instead of mercy." It sounds like mercy might be the forbearance that Paul talked about in anticipation of the possibility that we might be wronged. Is this the case?
Yeah, I think that's when Father Gregory Boyle talks about blessed are the merciful, that it's not just, it's a geography, it's a place you stand, it's a posture you have that says, I'm going to recognize that I am going to deal with all humans all day today who are tired and stressed, who are broken, who are going to mess up in the world, including with me, and I'm going to understand and have compassion and expect that, and I can still give them the love of God. Even if we're not having a forgiveness moment, I can have a generous moment.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, then what you're saying is forgiveness seems reactive, whereas mercy is a lot more proactive.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it, yeah.
Well, thank you. My last question to you, someone's asking, might the term son of David have been attention-seeking? This person is wondering whether they knew he was the Messiah or whether they were just saying that to draw attention to themselves.
Well, I didn't read about that in the commentaries as I got ready, but maybe let's say it was, right? Like, I think that's the part of that attention seeking when people are in need of mercy, is that they might do things that feel manipulative or that feel showy, and that doesn't negate their need for mercy. It increases our need to look past some of that behavior and see it anyways. So I don't think so, but even if it was, I'm not sure that that creates much of a shift.
So I've got an affirmation for you. Someone here is saying, thank you, Carolyn, for your vulnerability this morning with your family. It really shows how the mercy of God can be applied in our day-to-day life and take what the enemy meant for evil and turn it for good. So,
Well, thank you, and thank you to Jay that he has given me permission to share that.
thank you. Okay, so my first question to you says, I'm wondering what it looks like to keep healthy boundaries and extend mercy. Sometimes setting boundaries in a relationship does not feel very merciful.
Well, I think that line of when you think about mercy is giving somebody what they need rather than something that you deserve, that they deserve. I think that doesn't exclude boundaries, because I think boundaries are really helpful, very simply to find what's okay and what's not okay, right? If you let people walk all over you and you're helping them to not be kind, that's not merciful, right? And so I think the challenge is to put up boundaries, but you can do it in a merciful way, right? Like, you cannot talk to me. I was reading a story about a woman who was trying to reconnect with her abusive father, and she said, I'm going to call you every week to talk to you, but when you're rude and mean, without explanation, I'm just going to hang up because it's not okay, but I will call back again next week. And so she did. And so she saved herself from his abusive behavior, and he learned what was not okay to say. And so after a while, their conversations got a little longer, and she had a relationship with her father that was possible, rather than having it be she gets abused or she doesn't have a relationship at all. She found this middle way, and I think that's a really good story of mercy with boundaries.
Okay. If I recall one of your teachings, so finding the option C is the merciful thing.
Option C. Yes.
See, I was listening.
You were listening. That was in December.
Okay, so another question I have here is, if the blind men had asked for alms instead of sight, would Jesus have given them what they asked for, or would he have given them what they needed? I ask because so many times what we think we need, for example, vengeance, isn't at all what we need, but if we were asked, we would never ask for healing. What we would ask for was vengeance.
Well, I think it speaks to the courage of those blind men to ask for sight, because the expected thing would have been to ask for alms. That was all that anybody ever, like, give me money, like, I just need to be able to find something, enough that I can eat supper, right? And so it was really courageous of them to ask for more, but I think we could have then forgiven them for not knowing to ask more. And yeah, Jesus, I think, would have given them what they really needed rather than what they asked for. And I think that there's insight in that question of, so often when we're asking for something, we're not actually asking for what's truly good for us. We're asking for what we think we need, right? I know I ask myself for potato chips in the evening on a stressful day, and that's not really what I need, but it feels like it's what I need. Yeah.
Awesome. My last question seems more like a point than a question. We settle for forgiveness instead of mercy, the quote. Would mercy be the forbearance that Paul talked about in anticipation of the possibility that we may be wronged?
Well, I think we live in I closed last week's teach with a quote from Noun that says, forgiveness is what when we love poorly, and we all love poorly. We all need to be forgiven and to forgive every day. That's a part of being human. And so I think we can expect to be wronged and to be hurt, probably sometime this afternoon. And then forgiveness is an action that you then start to do, but mercy is where can be a geography. It's where I live, and it's that forbearance that says I can expect that to happen, and I'm planning in advance to know that that's going to happen, and how am I going to be generous in that space so that in the moment it's ready. And I think that's the call of discipleship. I've just made it sound very easy, and like I'm working on this, and I won't even have it right by the time I die, and you're not supposed to have it right either, right? Like, that's a part of growing and growing.
Awesome. That's everything that I have for you. Thank you so much for your responses.
Thank you, Patience.